In the 21st century, in the era of the internet, in the era of the instantaneous Google search, in the era of the increasing availability of information, but also the decreasing depth of that available information, in some ways, expertise and experience are underrated, and in some ways, they're overrated. I am the last person to come on the internet and discourage you from making your own YouTube videos talking about issues in politics, history, religion, philosophy even. I'm the last person to discourage you by saying you're not an expert in this. However, what I encourage you to do is to speak in a really honest way from sources and speak to your own bias, your own perspective. And that way, you won't make videos that you yourself look back on later and regret. Don't speak in an objective voice as if you're not working from a finite set of sources and to certain conclusions that are guided by your own bias, your own agenda, which is fine. That's normal. It's normal to say, well, look, I just read these one or two books. It may just be you read these one or two Wikipedia articles. Let's face it, most YouTube videos are not even made on the basis of reading two whole books, right? And then to say, look, this is why I read the books. When I read these books, I had this preconceived idea, I had this agenda, I had this interest, and now here's the conclusion I came towards. Maybe you challenged your own bias, and now this is what you think. And you know what? Somebody in the audience may reach out to you and say, hey, look, you don't realize it, but the two books you read are really biased and really one-sided. They're actually, let's say they're communist propaganda. Depending on the topic, there's communist propaganda out there. Hey, you know, if you look at these other facts or this other version of events, you're going to get a different perspective. When I was living in Laos, let's say the first 1 year I was living in Laos. If you don't know what Laos is a small country north of Cambodia, northeast of Thailand, west of Vietnam, okay? It's a small country in Southeast Asia. When I was living in Laos, my first year there, I maybe read 6 books about the history of Laos, like maybe 6. And there aren't that many books that exist on the history of Laos. I went to the library there, and I would get these collections of conference papers, these huge tomes from these academic conferences, and I would take them off the shelf and I would go through and read every article dealing with the history of Laos that was in there. And I probably read a pretty big percentage of what exists in the English language about the history of Laos. And then I would meet these people. I would meet people who had PhDs. I would meet people who were writing books on this topic. You know, sometimes there were people who wrote more like guidebooks for tourists, other kinds of history books. And it seemed like I always knew more than they did. It seemed like I was better informed, and I didn't think of myself as an expert. And this is a kind of shocking and strange thing about the world of expertise and university credentials and who knows what and why. And you know what the huge advantage I had was I was honest with myself and was honest with others about how little I knew and what it was I relied on for that knowledge, how it was I came to know those things, all right? Skepticism isn't just something you apply outward toward the world of scientific phenomena outside you. It's something you have to apply inwardly. You have to look in the mirror skeptically. You have to examine your own conclusions skeptically and how you came to those conclusions. And what was your agenda? What were your assumptions? What were the sources you relied upon? All right? If you can do that on YouTube, then you can make brilliant, valuable, meaningful videos even when you're not an expert. And I would say the same about writing essays, about exploring new topics and new themes in life. Okay? There is another YouTube channel. He's also vegan. I'm vegan. He's also an atheist. I'm an atheist, okay? Called Cosmic Skeptic. And I deeply hate this guy. I utterly despise his YouTube content. We have so much in common, and yet I hate him. And this hatred is demonstrated really well by a video he just did recently about Galileo. Okay? So it's about the trial of Galileo. And the thing is, I don't know to what extent this kid is consciously aware that he's creating new mythology. I don't know if he's really aware of how dishonest he's being, how misleading he's being in telling this story from history. Because he's not honest about his sources, he's not honest about his motivations, his purpose, his biases, he's not honest about the process here. And the product is this bizarre and baffling concoction of half-truths, mythology, so on and so forth. Now, I'm going to prove this to you with just one source. Okay, let's be clear. If you haven't watched Cosmic Skeptic's video about Galileo, don't watch it. It's garbage. Okay? But if you have watched it, you can challenge the quasi-historical fable he presents by simply looking at the Wikipedia article for Galileo's theory of the tides. Tide, T-I-D-E. Okay? So Galileo's theory of the tides coming in, the tides going out. If you just look at that one Wikipedia article, you are suddenly going to be aware, whoa, there's a whole different side to this history. Like in terms of the biography of Galileo, in terms of what his relationship was with the church, in terms of what his project was as an author. I mean, you can think of the guy as a scientist, but most of what he was doing was more like a social critic, an author. He was being a provocative philosopher, intellectual. He was politically challenged. Whoa! When you look at this one Wikipedia article about Galileo's theory of the tides, and as I recall, that includes also some of the information of the church's response to it, you realize, okay, what was going on here? It was not the case that Galileo was a humble scientist who was just interested in using his telescope, and he discovered this book written by Copernicus. No, okay? Now, all right, for those of you who don't know the details are boring. And this is part of what's so frustrating about encountering misinformation about politics, political history, philosophy, so on and so forth. It would be tremendously boring, and it would be a tremendous waste of my time for me to get out the books from the library and really go through in a detailed way and explain to you how and why Cosmic Skeptic's video about Galileo is misleading and how it's really a kind of dangerous mythology. It's a new fable being presented to the audience. And, it's not just a waste of my time. The sad fact is it would probably be a waste of your time also. I mean, there is no audience for it, right? So in this way, on the internet, mythology proliferates. And of course, the scariest examples are mythology about World War II. Mythology about the Russian Revolution, communism in Russia, and so on. And I'm saying the word mythology here. It's not that you're looking at something that's completely false. There are bits and pieces of the truth put together in a misleading way, in an appealing package, a fable with a clear moral to the story, right? Again, real history is never like that, And again, I've seen this being done by people who are communists, and I've seen people who were not communists and who were not even aware they were reading communist propaganda getting totally misled and bent out of shape. This is a parallel example. The problem with Cosmic Skeptic has nothing to do with communism. I've seen this happen on a massive scale with Buddhism, where disinformation about Buddhism, often, carefully pieced together from little bits and pieces of the truth that go together to make a modern myth. I've met so many people, including people with PhDs, who believe that there is no hell in Buddhism, that there's no going to hell after you die in Buddhism, and who are shocked when I tell them that no, the Pali Canon, the actual Bible of Buddhism, it's full of hell. There are vivid descriptions of hell that go on for many, many pages. And there are even, you could say, very cynical descriptions of how the concept of hell is part of a social engineering project that the Buddha is consciously engaged in to change human behavior by instilling in people an awareness of hell and a fear of hell, instilling in people the desire to be reborn in heaven, how this changes human behavior and changes society. You get kind of weird, cynical discussions in that. You get straight up mythology about hell. And, I see the way the whole world, including, of course, leaders of public opinion on YouTube, they step by step get into this process of mythologizing, this process of, valorizing history and philosophy, and it produces incredibly warped views of politics. And along the way, nobody is being honest about precisely what I'm begging you to be honest about. I'm saying if you make YouTube videos, if you write essays, if you're engaged in the public sphere, be honest about how you know what it is you know. And what were your motivations, your biases, what was your agenda? What were your motivations for discovering that to begin with? And then maybe how your views were challenged. And be honest with yourself and others about how finite the basis of your knowledge is. Because then when it changes later, you'll be able to look back on that and say, hey, you know what? My view of the abolition of slavery was really warped because I only looked at one period of time in American history. And I didn't think about Haiti, and I didn't think about China, I didn't think about ancient Egypt. Later in my life, I knew all these other examples. And you know what? I didn't even think about the earlier period of slavery within the United States of America. You only focused on the Civil War period, but actually we're talking about centuries going all the way back to Christopher Columbus and the importance of slavery and the genocide of Native people. And maybe now, working from more sources, better sources, greater knowledge, and maybe with a different set of motivations, different set of sensitivities, maybe now you're coming to different conclusions. It's the most wonderful thing in the world for non-specialists and non-experts to come here on YouTube. And my own experience is, in every field I've worked in, including history and politics of Southeast Asia, Laos, and Cambodia, oh my God, the experts on the history of Cambodia, the experts on the politics of Cambodia, which is maybe the most extreme example of the failure of communism killing huge numbers of people in a short span of time. Oh my God, the perspective of the experts on the history of Cambodia is way worse and way more dishonest and way more fictitious than what you're going to get from amateurs here on YouTube. Look up Noam Chomsky and his excuses for mass murder under the Khmer Rouge. Woo! There are some fields where the experts are all ideological maniacs. And Buddhist studies is a great example of that. It's only people who really believe in reincarnation and really believe that meditation is going to solve all your fucking emotional problems. These are the people with PhDs publishing books on Buddhism and shaping the way the world sees these things. There's no doubt an intelligent outsider with detachment and skepticism can come to more valuable conclusions about Cambodia and Laos, more valuable conclusions about Buddhism, more valuable conclusions about Galileo, or whatever the case may be. But you have to have this rigorous honesty where you don't just disclose your sources. You even reflect on why and how it is that you ended up choosing those sources, because there was some other choice with the opposite perspective that you rejected or you didn't even find out about, right? Let's be honest about our own ignorance. Let's be honest about where our knowledge comes from and where it's going, what the motivations are that drive us forward in that quest for knowledge. Let's learn together, because ignorance is infinite, and the desire we have to better ourselves and makes the world a better place through learning, tragically, is all too finite indeed.